Love really is a funny thing. Saturday, the 3rd of October, 1981. Picture the scene. A 5-year-old me, surrounded by my toys, playing quietly on the floor of my parents' South London council flat. My dad flicks on the telly, and I'm quickly distracted by the sound of an expectant football crowd and the voice of a commentator, Brian Moore. Ardiles, as a young Aussie drives from midfield inside his own half, flicking the ball out to our special guest this evening, who, evading three challenges, drifts out to the left flank, pirouettes on the ball before sending a high, arcing diagonal pass to the majestic Glenn Hoddle, who pops up on the right-hand side of the 18-yard box before coolly sending a first-time ball back across the box with his instep, perfectly weighted into the path of the arriving Mark Falco, who then finishes past the stranded keeper, just some random old bloke named Peter Shilton, with a ferocious first-time volley. Well, that was me, done. I was under football spell. Now, fast forward, September 1990. Former World Cup winner, Ardiles, now manager of my beloved Swindon Town, is in search of inspiration for a squad that's still battling to overcome the demotion that we suffered just days after I shed tears of joy at Wembley. The answer was to sign our special guest. By April 1991, Ozzy Ardiles had been tempted away by Sleeping Giants Newcastle, and the response from the Swindon board? The appointment of none other than Glenn Hoddle to his first managerial role. Now, if you're not recognising the romance and poetry by now, I may as well pack up and go home. As I said, love's a funny thing. Not only was tonight's guest responsible for me falling in love with football per se, but when he reappeared in my mid-teens as our club played arguably its most scintillating football, winning at Wembley in a spectacular fashion and delivering a top-flight experience to the county ground for the first time in our history, it was stuff that was written in the stars. So, 4 seasons, 143 appearances, 18 goals before a surprise departure back to his beloved Tottenham Hotspur, and a reunion with Messrs Ozzy Ardiles and Colin Calderwood. Ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure to give you son of Sunderland, Tottenham Hotspur favourite, and bona fide Swindon Town legend, Micky Hazard. Micky, good evening. How are you?
Good evening. I'm very good, thank you. Looking forward to the show.
Well, looking for, mate, as I said to you in the build-up to this, an emotional one for me because it's. We've spoken to a few Swindon Town legends since the show launched back in November of last year, and all of them have been an absolute thrill. But this is the first one that's really pulled on my heartstrings because I literally, my family were Tottenham Hotspur through and through. Growing up in Catford, South East London, you're probably a little bit puzzled as to how I'm such a big Swindon Town fan. But for you to be there right at the very start and play a role in that particular goal that sucked a 5-year-old me into the game, mate, that's emotional stuff. Even you would agree.
Yeah, no, it was a very special goal, to be honest with you. And when I look back at it, or when I see clips of it, I think you posted me a clip as well the other day. Maybe you've posted me 2 or 3 times.
I have.
But I've got to say that in my history of Spurs goals, that would rank very, very near the top of them. Not just because of the way we scored it, but because it was synonymous with the style of football that Tottenham Hotspur Football Club have preached throughout its history. And if you look to a goal that would sort of epitomise everything that we were about as a team, that goal captured every bit of it. So yeah, very special goal, and for a young 5-year-old to be sucked in, no, doesn't surprise me because I was 21 at the time, or 20, and it sucked me in.
Oh, Micky. Well, and the funny thing was, it was, a matter of minutes, really, later, and Glenn Hoddle's teed you up for what must probably be your second favourite Spurs goal of all time, past Peter Shilton again.
Yeah, I mean, it was a regular occurrence in those days to score past Peter, to be fair. But no, that was my first ever league goal. So it was such a special goal, one goal of the month too. So to play a part in one of the best Spurs goals, but then to score another one, maybe not quite as good, but certainly on a par. And in fact, I was very surprised that it won goal of the month because I actually thought the Mark Falco goal was actually better because it had everything. It had the fluency of the movement, the skill, the range of pass, the technique, the movement. It had everything. So that for me should have won goal of the month.
Well, Mickey, look, I'm sure you'll agree, as someone that, your passion for football went way beyond the sort of end of your professional football career. And I mean, there's many a club that you played for sort of way outside the professional game. And the quote about your love for football and your want to carry on playing for the love of football was always kind of within the first sort of 2 or 3 lines of the introduction. But football's got this wonderful way of throwing up these quirks and like karma-like coincidences that happen. And the reason why I thought it was such a good way to start tonight's show, talking about that particular goal, and for those listening that haven't seen it, I do urge you to go on and search it up. 1981 versus Nottingham Forest at White Hart Lane. But the interesting thing, if you're a Swindon Town fan, is clearly that the move was really driven forward by ex-Swindon Town manager Ossie Ardiles. The key pass was delivered by Swindon Town legend Micky Hazard. The if you will, the penultimate assist was delivered by ex-Swindon Town player manager and all-time great, arguably, Glenn Hoddle. And I mean, it is a goal that would go on to typify a style of football that you guys all brought down to the West Country with you, and introduced to a whole new raft of players. So during that period of time when you were at Swindon Town, Mickey, there was a long period of kind of like a casual association with Tottenham that the fans would draw, like playing that Tottenham way. And that became the Swindon way for many of us of a certain generation like me. And it's the standard that we hold Swindon Town teams to now. I mean, in reality, mate, we were very spoiled, weren't we?
I have to say, number one, to have a World Cup winner like Ossie Ardiles at Tottenham Hotspur Football Club was surreal. So to have him down at Swindon Town for their fans must have been, wow, totally surreal. And then, of course, Ossie signed me, who had, I wouldn't say learnt my trade at Spurs. I'd obviously learnt it when I was young, but had it enhanced by Spurs. And then obviously to bring Glenn Hoddle in at the same time and for them to introduce the quality of football that was renowned at Spurs and bring it to a club like Swindon was quite an incredible achievement, I think. I think that, if we look at what Glenn's achieved in the game, what Ossie's achieved in the game, as managers, as players, I think surely one of their greatest achievements, which must be the quality of football that they brought to a lovely little club like Swindon Town Football Club. That must rank incredibly high on their list of achievements, because it really was very, very special. And to be part of it, to be one of the members of that team that played that football, when you're playing, it's sort of you take it for granted as such. But I think it's years later, when you've retired, when you realise just how wonderful that little period was, not just in the history of Swindon, but in our own histories. Anybody can go and play for a top club with top players and produce quality football. But when you go to a smaller club, to produce an attempt to play the quality of football that was played without the finances to sign the really top players of the world, to do it at a club like Swindon was quite incredible, I think. And for that, I will always say that it would rank so high in Glenn and Ossie's greatest achievements because of where they did it. Guardiola's did it at Barcelona, he did it at Bayern Munich, he did it at Manchester City, with vast amounts of money on offer to surround himself with great top world-class footballers. Glenn Hoddle and Ossie Ardiles preached that same style that Guardiola preaches, but he did it with far lesser players at far lesser clubs, with far lesser finances, and that must rank surely as one of their greatest achievements.
Well, it's interesting you say that, Mickey, because I've just finished reading Glenn's book, and I think anyone that's kind of done that cover to cover, I think Glenn makes just that point that, England manager, Tottenham manager, Wolves manager, manager of Southampton, managed some super clubs and managed some super players. But he makes that very point that, his achievements at Swindon Town rank right up there, and rightly so. But tonight, listen, Micky, we're going to have a little bit of fun tonight because, as I said during the setup to this show, let's what we like to do is we'd like to try and come at things from a slightly different angle with this show. And I'm going to introduce you to my co-host shortly, Tyler, who's also his family are steeped in an appreciation of Spurs, you'll be pleased to know, as well as being diehard Swindon Town fans. So you're in good company, Micky. You're on safe ground. But what I thought we'd do is we'd drill into that squad, and we'll do what we'll casually refer to as my teammates of 1993. It's a nice and casual conversation, almost like we bumped into you at a bar, and I'm going to literally go through those lads, and hopefully you'll be able to, almost like player by player, lift the lid on what those boys were like, their characters. I'm sure you've got a raft of funny stories that you still recall from back then. Inevitably, it will take us into journeys like the Birmingham comeback. We'll talk about the Wembley experience, the Tranmere experience in the semis, and I'm sure we're going to touch on quite a few of your 18 stories amongst your 18 great goals as well. But at this stage, I'll introduce you to Tyler. Tyler, meet Micky. Micky, meet Tyler.
Hi, Tyler.
You all right? How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. You?
Yeah, I'm not bad.
Good on you.
So, Micky, Tyler's that I like to refer to him as my how can I put this? I'm the old duffer. Tyler's the young upstart. So the way this show kind of works quite nicely is I've got a wonderful point of reference on the Lou Macari, Ozzy Ardiles, Glenn Oddle years. Poor old Tyler, he's had to put up with a lot of stuff that's followed on from that, which I'm sure you'll appreciate. Means he's missed a large chunk of the golden generation. And I love teasing him about the stories that I've been able to enjoy, and poor old Tyler hasn't. So, but Tyler, I said as part of the introduction, your family got a good appreciation for Spurs, haven't they?
Yeah. Obviously, with Glenn, Ozzy, Micky, it sort of just naturally came about for them all because they're mainly Town fans. But when you've got that Spurs connection coming through anyway, you do sort of grow a soft spot.
You certainly do. And also, Micky, it didn't just sort of stop with those golden players we talked about either, did it? Because it would be remiss of us not to talk about Johnny Moncur coming from Spurs, the likes of Sean Close, who we actually, when Ozzy signed Sean, we kind of hoped that he was going to, he'll do the business. He was Ozzy's first signing. It never quite happened. But there were people like Tony Galvin as well that also played for us. All of these guys have all sort of like, served some time at the Lane. And were brought up playing a certain type of football. So, as I say, all sort of like tips I have back to that golden generation. But if we move on to the 1993 squad, then I'll throw a couple of curveballs at you because there was a group of young lads in and around that squad who it didn't make a lot of appearances in '93. But I'm going to start by throwing a name at you of Austin Berkeley. Do you remember Austin as part of the group that would have included the likes of Marcus Phillips, Andy Thompson? I guess Adi Vivash was at the sort of older end of that group, but how important was that group of youngsters, including the likes of Austin, to that squad?
Well, listen, I'm a massive believer in youth and developing your own youngsters to come through. Every great footballer that's ever been developed, like Lionel Messi, like Diego Maradona, like Ronaldo, they've all been developed from being a young junior player to a young youth team player, and then they've made it through into becoming a world-class superstar. So why not develop your own if you can find the method that will help you produce that world-class footballer? For a club like Swindon, it could be the difference between survival or not because of the money that it could generate. So developing your own, I always think a youth system is absolute key to a club's success, whether it be at the very top of the game. If you look at the great Man United team that won so many trophies, Beckham, Scholes, the Neville brothers, Giggs, Nicky Butt, Wes Brown, they had so many homegrown talents. Because the homegrown players, they give a club its heart and soul, And then the big name signings, what they do is that they come in and they help make the homegrown players better footballers because they're playing with better footballers. They're being educated by better footballers as well as what they've learned from within the club. And the two combined go to making a really successful part. So there's a team, there's a massive role for youth players coming through the system to help the sort of young professionals that are in the first team, but also the senior professionals. You've got to keep them on your toes because if you're not developing youth, then there's nothing coming through to keep the players in the team on their toes. That's really important because, I'm not a big fan of the rotational system of modern day football. I don't like it. I always believe that you pick your best 11 players and then it's up to the ones behind to push the 11. One, to keep them on the toes, but two, to try and take their place. And when you've took their place, you've got to stay in the side, which means when you're out the side, you've got to fight harder to get in it. If you're forever guaranteed a place just because of the rotation, then there's less incentive to fight, to improve, to develop, to grow, to force your way into the team. So the importance of youth players, doesn't matter who it is, it's important that they develop and grow to keep players like me who are coming to the end of my career, ready to fight for my place to sustain my career for a bit longer.
Did you, so as a group of youngsters, I mean, probably the best thing, I mean, I mentioned Austin, but then I also mentioned people like, the Marcus, I mean, we're talking about a long time ago, and a lot of these lads, your Eddie Murrays, etc., they didn't make a lot of appearances in that 93 season. And actually, the squad wasn't that big on numbers, was it really, when you look back at it? But did they, as a group of young lads, did you, I guess a couple of questions really, did you ever think that, taking on board what you're saying about pushing the players on, did you feel that we had the strength in depth with the younger players and that they were of a sufficient quality that they could have pushed on through? And equally, what were they like as a group of lads? Because you're talking, it's one thing walking into a change room and seeing, with all due respect to some of our more recent legends, the Billy Painters, the John Paul McGoverns, the Charlie Austins, these boys walking into a change room and there's a Glenn Hoddle. That's a very different kettle of fish. So, like I say, a twofold question really. One, did they really have the quality as a group of youngsters, as a collective, to really feel like, for you guys to really feel like they were challenging you? But also, what were they like as characters, as personalities, those young lads?
Well, first of all, I remember everyone that you've named, and I have to say that they were all very, very nice young lads. Maybe too nice, and that's not a slur. I'd rather be nice than not nice. But sometimes in football, as a youngster coming through, while you have to respect who you're up against and what you're trying to achieve, it's also important to not have so much respect that it hinders you in your growth. And I felt that maybe, people like Eddie Murray and Marcus Phillips and Austin and I think Ty Godden came a little bit later. I think we brought him in from some non-league club, I think. So Nicky Summerby was coming through, Fitzroy Simpson. They were sort of maybe a couple of years later than them guys. So there was youngsters there sort of knocking on the door, pushing. Did I personally ever feel threatened by anyone? No, I didn't. Would Glenn Hoddle have? I'm pretty confident he wouldn't have. Well, if you're the manager, you're not going to be, are you? No, I never felt threatened. I don't think anyone particularly played in my position, which maybe helped. There was no one sort of playmaker type who was a major threat to me. Eddie, I think Eddie was sort of centre back. Marcus Phillips sort of could have been classed as someone an attacking midfielder. Austin midfielder as well, but not in my mould. So no, did I feel threatened? No, not one little bit. I felt that as long as I was fit and able, I would be in the team week in, week out. Of course, if I was injured or coming back from injury, I would have to work my way back to my fitness levels. But no, I have to be honest there and say, no, I never felt at any stage during my whole stay at Swindon that anybody was sort of threatening me from behind.
Yeah. I mean, as I say, it was what really amazed me when we got to the end of that season and achieved the success we did. I started looking back at old match day programs, and you look at the size of the squad, and when you start eliminating, some of the younger lads that you never really felt like got a run of games. I mean, yeah, there were a few League Cup appearances and whatnot, but you sort of marvelled at how few players actually carried us as far as we did that season. And I'll never forget, I mean, we'll come on to Wembley, but I'll never forget the point where Leicester pulled it back to 3-3. I remember at that stage leaning on the cliche that the boys look like they're running on fumes here, and actually then sort of thinking, well, look, it's unsurprising given the number of players, or the relatively few number of players that we picked. But all right, fascinating. Well, look, we go from like a group of youngsters then to a very, very established and very popular figure at Swindon Town, at Mr. Reliable left back, marauding left back, goal scoring left back, assisting left back, Paul Bowden. What are your memories of Zippy?
Well, I think it's important to, when you are playing at any particular time with a group of players, I think that you sort of not really you're aware of it, but you're not really taking any notice of it, if you like, because you're all out there playing together and doing what you've got to do together. So you're not aware of how lucky you are to have played with such a lovely group of lads, but also such a good group of footballers, given that we'd sort of dropped down a league. So Paul Bowden was a very funny character, a really, really nice guy, very charming, very friendly and warm, always ready for a quip, but ever such a good player as well. And in the role that certainly Glenn Hoddle wanted to use him, that sort of wing back role, he was perfect for that system, and because he loved to get forward. He had a wonderful left foot. He could put crosses in. He could score goals. He was ever such a good player, for maybe more underrated than he should have been, because he really could have played at the very top as a left back. And it surprised me that he never actually went on and really made a big name for himself. I know he made a big name in Swindon and what have you, but he was far better than that. He could have gone and played for a really top club, I think. He was a really, really good player.
Yeah, interesting one, Zippy, because I've got very clear. So where I live, Mickey, I'm literally a stone's throw from Sellers Park, really. And there's a lot of the people that live amongst me, around me, and amongst the family, are all Crystal Palace supporters. I, just because of where I lived at the time, I took in a few of Paul's games at the Palace when he moved over there for what at the time was quite a decent chunk of change. And I like you. I was always surprised that he never really made a name for himself at Palace in that, superb Palace side of Wright, Bright, Gray, Eric Young, Andy Thorne. I mean, they really were on the up. But it just never really clicked for him. I mean, was there ever a sort of discussion that either you had with him or the squad had, Mickey?
No, what I will say is that football at Swindon was sort of false, and I mean that as a wonderful compliment. It was sort of false because English football at that time was going through a period of up and under, and kick the ball as high and as far as you can, and we were sort of different to the norm. We were the ones who played it on the floor, played it through the different sections of the team, rarely resorted to long ball. So consequently, the players were successful within that system because it enabled them to be, or it played a part in them being successful. First of all, they had to be good enough to play in that system and had to understand that system. But the system itself is created, when you play the beautiful game, that wonderful flowing passing game of football, that gives each and every one of you the opportunity to showcase your talents. Whereas when you play in an up and under team, unless they play through each unit of the side, or it's bypassing it. I mean, for instance, if I'd have played for Wimbledon in those days, I wouldn't have got a kick of the ball. and you might never have
Yeah.
seen my talents develop in the way that they could. But that's why I always chose my moves carefully, because I wanted to play the beautiful game. So if we were playing the beautiful passing game, then I wanted to be part of it, because I knew I would flourish in that. And I think that's maybe what happened to Paul, is that he was so good within that system, that false football that we created. It's not false football; it's beautiful football, but it was false in the English game at that time, because hardly anybody else played that way. So Paul was wonderful in that system, but going to another system of play, another style, it maybe would have not allowed him to flourish the way he flourished in that Swindon team.
It's interesting because, I mean, I've got a couple more points on Zippy before we move on, but David Kerslake was probably another example like that, where David moved off to Leeds for quite a lot of money, into a very, very successful Leeds side. Wasn't the same player, was he, as he was at Swindon, where he was an absolute deity down that right hand side. And obviously a move on after Leeds to Spurs, and you saw glimpses of the great David Kerslake that we saw, but he was never quite the same player. Now, I appreciate that obviously he went up levels and moved into the Prem and so forth, but yeah, it was for me always a similar scenario. But going back to Zippy then, being totally honest with me, Mickey, at the stage we get the penalty, did you have any doubts in your mind, or do you remember what was going through your mind when Zippy spotted it up?
Yeah, I remember it as if it was yesterday. I said, "Why the heck is Glenn Hoddle not taking it?" Simple as that. We've got, for me, the most naturally gifted footballer that I've ever seen in England, almost in the world. I've not seen many more naturally gifted than Glenn Hoddle, if any. And he was penalty taker all his career. Experienced at taking penalties. We're in a major cup playoff final to get to the Premier League, and I just felt, wow. I mean, if I was on the pitch, I'd have been taking it. But Glenn being Glenn, I suppose from a manager's perspective, it was, I don't know, it's your players' day. Glenn had all his glories, I suppose, and I'm certain his mind would have passed through his mind, but then I thought it was very honourable. In reality, in hindsight, very honourable that, because he could have stepped up, took the pen, and took the glory that goes with it, and he didn't. But if I was the manager sitting on the side of the pitch, I'd have been saying Glenn Hoddle penalty. But I never doubted Zippy would score. He had a really, really lovely left foot, Zippy. But that's what was going through my mind. Glenn Hoddle should be taken.
Yeah, I mean, it was an interesting one at the time. I mean, I'll be honest. Bizarrely, Mickey, I'm a huge Glenn Hoddle fan, but the thought never occurred to me that should have been Glenn taking the penalty. And hearing you kind of bring that to life, I totally understand the logic behind it. I think, excuse me, we'll come on and we'll talk about Glenn in a bit, because there's a couple of moments, particularly in that season, that were pure theatre. But yeah, blow me. I mean, you talk about a cool head. I think the thing that really struck me, and it even came out in Zippy's celebration as well, if there was a guy you wanted that late in the game, following on from that level of drama, taking that penalty from a Swindon Town fan's point of view, it was Paul. Now, interestingly, from the stands, I had absolutely no doubt either that he would hit the back of the net. But how cruel was it a few weeks later when he's charged to do something very similar for Wales, and it didn't quite go to plan? So again, we talk about the quirks of football. It doesn't always work out the way you want, does it?
Listen,
I'm sorry for any Wales fans that I might be offended or upsetting with any old.
Just listen. Let me just say this to you. I haven't taken any number of penalties throughout my career. I sat in a dressing room before a game. I never once felt nervous. I was very confident in the ability that I had. I didn't feel if I was on my day anybody could touch me. So I never felt nervous before games because I felt like I only have to play to my talents, and I'll be the best. But every time I took a penalty, I might have looked so confident and so assured and so certain. But let me tell you, my legs were like jelly.
Wow.
So when anybody misses a penalty, uh, I have to say that I fully understand, because when you're in practice and you practice on them, the goal looks 400 yards wide. But then when you're in a game, it looks a yard wide, and the goalie looks like it's filling the old goal. And as you run up to strike the ball, your legs turn to jelly. And it's actually hard to keep your balance almost. And we do see players slipping over. But it's the only occasion in a football game where I've really felt um, like, wow, why do I put myself through this? Because it's I suppose part of the nervousness of the situation is that it's a no-win situation. If you score, you should score. But if you miss, you're every name under the book. So I suppose that adds to the pressure of the situation. But having been someone who doesn't really feel pressure, don't think about pressure, don't feel nervous, penalties, God, my legs used to turn to jelly as I was running up to kick the ball.
Yeah, but you were such a natural, like from the stand, Mickey, because you took plenty of them,
Yeah,
and certainly you did in the red and white Swindon Town. That never came across. So
no,
that was all kidology, was it, buddy?
I wouldn't say it was kidology. I think you're left with no option. And the beauty of nerves, from my perspective, is that nobody can see them.
Yeah,
So anybody, if that keeper knew what I was feeling as I was running up, it would fill him with so much confidence. But unfortunately, he couldn't tell because I ran up and I struck the ball. But the moments before I struck the ball were possibly the worst moments in my football career.
So do you again, sort of like my closing point on Zippy then was his penalty taking something you saw a lot of in training? Was that just muscle memory for him? Was that, I mean, it clearly he was a penalty expert, but what was it about, about Paul taking it that filled you with confidence? Because I'm kind of guessing you must have seen this hundreds of times from him before, just relentless routine. Or
no, I tend to judge. If you ask me to pick a penalty taker, I would always pick someone who's calm. If you're calm in possession of the ball, it tends to mean that you'll approach a penalty in the same way. That doesn't mean you won't get nervous. I mean, I was very, very calm on the ball. I never ever panicked. I always felt, if you the analogy that I use to describe composure in football is that if I'm trapped in a house that's burning fire and I run down to the front door and the flames are rising, the smoke's rising, and I panic, then the next day they find me burnt to death with scratch marks all around the door. But if I keep my calmness and composure, then I say, right, the handle's generally in the middle of the door, on the outside of the door, so find where the outside of the door is, work my hand round till I find the handle. And then I open the door and I get out the fire and I save myself. And that's football. Some players feel under pressure when there's a man 25 yards away. And other players, like Glenn, you could have three men around him, half a yard away, and he wouldn't feel under any pressure. So calmness and composure enables you to have a much, much clearer picture of what's happening around you. So when you choose a penalty taker, for me, I would always choose the one who's calm in possession and calm and in control of his emotions. And Zippy was that. Zippy was very calm under pressure. You never felt he would panic. He never just put the ball into row Z, really. He would always try to play and get the ball down and play it out. So that meant to me that he would have the calmness and the composure to take a penalty.
Gotcha. Well, talking about calmness and composure then, it's only right and proper that we move on to Mr. Calmness and Composure in a Swindon Town shirt. 54 appearances in 1993. The skipper, Colin Calderwood. What your recollection of the fridge?
The fridge. I would say it's rare that I have come across such a incredibly lovely human being as Colin Calderwood. He was Mr. Nicest personified. He was the perfect captain because everybody loved him, everybody respected him. He was calm, composed, complimentary. He would, if you did something good, he would sing your praises. I give you a confidence boost if you needed it. He rarely lost his rag. In fact, in every game I ever played with him, I cannot remember having one solitary crossword with him, because he was that type of character. He really was Mr. Wonderful as far as I'm concerned, and I would actually go as far as to say, as in my time there, I would class Colin as Mr. Swindon.
Were you aware, Mickey, when you arrived at Swindon, just how much Colin had already achieved? As in, clearly, obviously, Colin had been with us, promotion out of what is obviously the current division that we find ourselves in, subsequent promotions coming out of the third tier, almost a successful playoff campaign, and then a successful playoff campaign, and then the troubles that followed that, and Colin stuck with us all the way through. When you arrived at the club in that kind of era, did Colin have an aura of that about him? As in, this is somebody that's already achieved an awful lot in his Swindon Town career. Was that something that was immediately evident, or was it sort of more understated?
Very difficult when you've come from Tottenham Hotspur Football Club or whoever I was playing for, Chelsea, whatever, and you've played with Glenn Hoddle and Ozzy Ardiles, World Cup winners and FA Cup winners and UEFA Cup winners. You've won these things yourself. It's very difficult to go to a football club like Swindon that haven't really competed in these competitions and be aware of what individuals within that team have achieved. So I was oblivious to Colin. I didn't really know Colin, and although I had gone to the playoff final with Sunderland, where I thought Swindon were absolutely sensational, I couldn't wait to actually join them because I thought that what Aussie's built there is just absolutely perfect for my style, and I couldn't wait to get there. So I was oblivious to Colin and his achievements. Obviously, I'd spoken to Ozzy about him, and Ozzy spoke very highly of him, so highly that eventually he signed him for Spurs. But I have to be honest and say that I wasn't aware of hardly any of the Swindon Town players and their achievements. Whether that's a slur on me or not, it probably is. I should have known everything about any club I joined. Or all the players within that club, but I didn't. But quickly got to know them and quickly got to respect and admire Colin, and to this day I still hold him in the highest of esteem, not just as a footballer but as a human being. I think he's an incredible human being. I saw him, I went to a Northampton game recently up at Northampton, and Colin after the game brought me into the manager's office. We sat down and had a right laugh and a joke and a few quips about the good old days at Swindon, and it was nothing that I wouldn't expect of Colin, Mr. Wonderful and Mr. Swindon.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you what, a funny thing, Mickey, actually, because we've obviously, since your time, we've had more than our fair share of managerial changes at Swindon, and for various reasons, the timing always seemed to be working against us in relation to Colin ever coming back to the club. So I remember at one point he was doing particularly well at Forest, and we were looking at having some managerial changes, and you could see that the way that things worked at that time, it didn't quite work out. And then I believe it may have even been before Forest, actually, if I'm correct, when he was at Hibs. Similar story. We had a managerial change a couple of weeks after he ends up leaving Hibs, and then there was talk when he was at Cambridge. There was talk of potentially we could be seeing Colin Calderwood at the county ground, and again the timings just never quite stacked up. But yeah, one of the great frustrations for me. I guess I spoke to a West Ham fan recently, and they said something to me, something similar about Bobby Moore. They were saying that the great Bobby Moore to them, like Colin Calderwood, is almost like regarded as our Bobby Moore. And again, the timing was never quite right with Moro, as this West Ham fan called him. Moro it never quite worked for him in terms of him getting the big job at West Ham. Do you, knowing Colin as you do, then Mickey, do you think that Colin has probably resigned himself now in the modern era of football to being a coach as opposed to being sort of the front of shop presence that is a manager? Or do you think we could ever harbour any hopes of seeing Colin back at Swindon Town in the top job?
I think it depends where he is at the time that the job arises, of course. I mean, I went to the Northampton Swindon game and was very impressed with the quality of the football that Swindon played that day, actually. They played very well. I think it was a 1-1 draw. Swindon played very well. Spoke with the Swindon manager after the game as well. Will Colin one day be back there? Why not? I think his reputation is that he's a very, very good coach. And sometimes players are better coaches than they are managers. Have they got, to be a manager, you've got to have a bit of a streak. You've got to be tough, and you've got to be able to command the respect of all the boys, not just by being nice, but also by being tough when you need to be. And Colin has that streak, no doubt about it. So I think it depends. I'd like to see him back at Swindon. I'd have liked to manage Swindon as well a few years ago. I thought I was interested. I wouldn't never put myself forward, but I felt that they could have come in for me. I'd have gone straight away. But Colin, yes, I can see Colin one day being the Swindon manager. I'm sure it's in one of his lists that he'd like to achieve, given how successful he was there. Who knows? Certainly, I wouldn't write it off. As the time passed them by, no, there's still plenty of time, and it wouldn't surprise me if one day he became the manager.
So did you, going back to Colin as a skipper then, you sort of touched on it there about, he could certainly sort of be lively where he needed to. Did you ever have any stories of Colin sort of showing his teeth in the dressing room? Because he was always, the demeanour you saw on a pitch, well, hence his nickname, he was always just sort of like cool as a cucumber. I do remember at Wembley in I think it was the Wembley game, 93, where he was having a tussle with Joshim, and there was a little bit of handbags. But it never, I don't ever really recall Colin properly throwing a wobbler. But how did he command the dressing room? Was it that steely sort of what he didn't, it was almost what he didn't say that got people's attention? Or when he needed to, could he throw the teacups?
I think that in those days, football was maybe slightly different in that it was the manager who commanded the dressing room at half time. The assistant manager would then have his say, etc. The captain rarely would get a chance to speak, other than to say something, motivational. Come on, guys, we can do this. Colin was full of that, but I never heard him. I never heard him say anything angry or behave in a really angry way. I know it's within him if he needs to, but he preferred the problem with shouting and ranting and raving is sometimes the message doesn't get across because it creates a bad reaction in whoever you're being angry at. So it's far better to actually talk to them in a nice, charming manner, which will enable the message that you're trying to get over, rather than, because sometimes you start shouting at a player or throw a cup of tea at them or whatever, then the player's reaction to that is often to meet aggression with aggression. So he will come back and have a go, and that's not then achieving the end product. The end product is you need your message to get over, so that when they get back out on the pitch, they need to, and this is where Glenn was great. I rarely heard Glenn lose his head neither, because he wanted his message to get over for when we went back out onto the pitch, and pretty much Colin was very much like that too.
Yeah. So again, the nickname sort of speaks volumes. But look, an old Spurs colleague of yours, and he's much maligned, is the lad that I'm about to bring up now, Micky, and I'm fascinated to get your views on him. Appreciate he didn't play that much football. I mentioned Ozzy Ardiles, his first signing. Sean Close. Now, came with a reputation of being a goal scorer at away from the first team ranks at Tottenham. Arrived at Swindon, and it just never quite happened for him. What were your recollections of Sean as a striker? Because appreciate he had formidable opponents for his shirt ahead of him. Initially, when he's first arrived, he's got Duncan Shearer in the squad. He's got Steve White scoring goals, and then obviously the following season, you've got Dave Mitchell comes in, and Dave Mitchell's scoring loads of goals as well. But do you have any kind of Spurs recollections and indeed Swindon recollections on Sean?
I think as a 16-year-old, everybody had high hopes for Sean, and I think at 16 he had lots and lots and lots of potential, But it's remembering that as a 16-year-old, life as a footballer is a lot simpler. Number one, the people that you're playing against they're not the finished article. They're not even close to being the finished article. They've got a lot of learning to do before they even get close to being the finished article. So often there's weaknesses in defenders, midfielders, centre forwards, all over the pitch. So therefore it's easier to score a goal. There'll be more mistakes happen at that level, or more bad positional play, or more this or more that. For instance, I always use an analogy whereby there's a 7-year-old kid who can beat 13 7-year-olds. And then by the time he's 10, he can only beat 6 7-year-olds. By the time he's 13, he can beat 3. By the time he's 16, he can't beat any, because he hasn't really learnt the art of dribbling, because he was basically dribbling because of the bad defending of all the kids who hadn't learnt how to defend yet. And that can be sort of thrown at 16-year-olds as well, is that the individual defending is not mastered. The team defending as a unit and being linked and close, tied together, is not mastered. So consequently, there's much more opportunities to be successful goal scorer, and that's why we often see so many 16, 17-year-olds getting 40 odd goals a season. Then when they get into the first team, where organisation and individual defensive abilities have improved vastly, becomes much more difficult to score, and you've got to have something different. Sean technically was very good, but he wasn't very tall, so he was never going to be outstanding in the air. Although he could hit a ball, he wasn't very quick, so he wasn't going to be able to get in behind defences on the end of through passes. So never quite had enough to actually make that step up from where he was as a 16, 17, 18-year-old to being a first-team player.
Yeah, I think that's a fair one. And I think the other thing that Sean always had going against him was that the lads that were ahead of him didn't really ever get injured significantly, and I think so much about being a great striker relies on getting a run of games and getting a rhythm. We've got a lad in the first team at the moment at Swindon who he's kind of there or thereabouts. Jaden Mitchell-Lawson reminds me a lot of Sean Close. You're kind of just hoping that he'll get a run of games, get into that rhythm. One goes in off his knee and then he's away, because so much of it is about confidence. But yeah, it just seemed like the door never really opened for Sean. But no. A door that was very much open, however, down the other end of the pitch, certainly in relation to the Swindon Town fans, was the great Fraser Digby. What do you recall of Fraser's time, your time with Fraser, particularly in that 93 season, Micky?
Fraser Digby, I absolutely adored. I must be honest, I adored him. I thought that he could be England's #1 goalkeeper. I really did. I thought he was very special talent. I'm going to say something detrimental about Fraser, and I hope he doesn't take it. I've actually told him, so he knows. I can't speak any more high of him as a goalkeeper, in that I thought he was extra special. He had everything that a top goalkeeper should have. the one ingredient that cost them being the best keeper in England was he didn't believe in himself in the way that he should. To have that much talent, to have that much going for you as he had, and he was very, very special, I have to say. Um, to not fulfill it because you didn't believe in yourself, I find sad, because there's nothing would have given me greater pleasure than to see Fraser Digby, because he's an absolutely smashing human being. I would love to have seen Fraser Digby play 100 times for England, because he was so special as a goalkeeper. But then the fact that I'm saying that, you then have to question why he didn't make it to be the best. And it come down to, and I'm not speaking out of turn here, because I've said that too. I did a Q&A with Fraser at Swindon Town Football Club, and I said that publicly in front of the all crowds to Fraser. I genuinely believe that if he'd have had Glenn Hoddle's belief, then I think he would have been England's number one. He was that good.
Well, they also, I mean, from the stands, Fraser, and it might have been very different in the changing room, but you got the impression that at times he had a difficult relationship with Glenn. Was that the case? Because obviously Fraser spent some time away from the club, going back to Man United, and then came back to Swindon Town utterly rejuvenated. And I do remember a particular goal, and I'm trying to remember exactly who it was against, possibly against that horrible yellow mob up the A420. But I remember Glenn leaning over Fraser, really drilling into him when that goal went in. And I think that was about the time Fraser went off to United on loan. Was that anything to do with belief and their kind of the way the two characters were sort of mentally built clashing? Is there anything in what I'm saying, or was it actually no? Like, you know,
was I fully aware of? Look, a manager's right is to pick the team that he thinks is the best team or the best players. That's his right, and his job will be dictated to by whether or not the team he picks is successful or not. And Glenn didn't suffer fools gladly. Glenn wanted to succeed in management, and rightly so. And he had so much talent as a manager, so much knowledge, so much tactical awareness, that there was no reason why he should fail. So it's sort of Glenn's what's the word, is his desire to be successful. Always wanted to be the best, because he'd always been the best. And then Fraser comes along, this incredibly talented goalkeeper, and I've no doubt Glenn rated him incredibly highly. But then saw reactions in Fraser that would cost. Maybe Fraser would make a mistake for a goal, and then that goal would play on his mind for a while, and sort of wear him down. Whereas, you've got that happens. Goalies make mistakes. Outfield players make mistakes. If you spend your time dwelling on the mistake, then you're going to make another mistake and another mistake. So I thought that, and Micky Hazard had sort of come along and was having a good spell. So Glenn was at liberty to try out. If Fraser was losing a bit of confidence, then it meant that Glenn had to have a look at Micky. So no one's to blame. But I really wish that I could have helped Fraser at the time, because he was England's goalie. He really was. He was special goalkeeper. From the minute I arrived, I thought, wow, this boy's got the lot as a goalkeeper if he wants it. And I think if you speak to Fraser as well, I'm sure Fraser will say he fell short in what he achieved because of how much talent he had. To be the best goalkeeper in England, I think he really was that good. And it's sad. It's always sad when someone so special doesn't fulfill. Sometimes I look at myself and I think, people say, "Oh, you had a great career. You won this, you won that, and you won that." And I think, well, yeah, but if you saw the talent that I had, I should have achieved more. But I had a rebel. Mine wasn't because of lack of belief. Mine was because I was a bit of a rebel. I only believed that there was one way to play the game. That was the beautiful way. So I wasn't going to deviate my beliefs to accommodate a manager's beliefs. You know, when really, if I was a little bit cleverer or wiser, I would have let the manager think I was, oh yeah, Glenn, or yeah, Ozzy, or yeah, Keith, I'll do that for you. And then every now and again do it for them, but then the rest of the time do what I wanted, within the framework of the team. But I was adamant that no, I don't want to do that. I want to play the beautiful game. I want to play on the floor through the units of the team. I want to do creative things. I want to play with skill. I want to play with flair. I want to do the nice things of the game. I don't really enjoy the running 50 yards to make a slide and tackle back. I'll just give me the ball at my feet and I'll do the magic. But you have to adapt your thinking to the managers as well. So I didn't quite fulfill. So I know when I talk about Fraser not fulfilling, I'm sort of in a similar bracket. And we might not be classed in the same bracket, but I know the talent that I had and I didn't fulfill. I should have had a lot of England caps and I didn't get a lot. I got picked for England at every level, but I didn't fulfill my potential to play for England. And Fraser pretty much the same, although probably to a bigger degree than me.
Well, you mentioned who else was putting a bit of heat up behind Fraser coming in Micky Hazard. So we had John Gorman was speaking to the official supporters club a couple of weeks back, and I asked him to draw a comparison between Fraser and Nicky, and he pointed out that he thought that of the two, the one thing that Nicky really had over Fraser was that he was really comfortable on the deck, and in that particular Swindon team, that must have been a real pull for Glenn, surely. Like, you talk now about sweeper keepers and, at your beloved Tottenham, you've got Hugo Lloris who, would sort of fit that mould. But Nicky was ahead of his time, back then, wasn't he, in terms of a goalkeeper that's very comfortable on the deck. And I think Fraser would probably be the first one to say that of the two keepers, certainly Fraser wasn't as comfortable on the floor as Nicky. What were your thoughts on Nicky as a keeper?
Yeah, fully agree that if you're looking for a footballing goalkeeper, then Micky Hazard would be ahead of Fraser Digby. If you were looking for a goalkeeper, then Fraser Digby would be ahead of Micky Hazard. But the main difference, other than the footballing ability on the floor, was that Fraser believed that he was less than what he really was. For me, he was great, but he believed he was quite good. And Nicky was much more than what he really was. So Nicky believed he was great, where he was quite good. To get the comparison that I make, one goalkeeper who could have been great believed he was quite good, and another goalkeeper who was quite good believed he was great. And that was the difference between the two, is and why Nicky had that spell where he sort of ousted Fraser and got his run in the team, because his belief was so much stronger, and also he was good on the floor. But if I was, and again, I'm not slurring Nicky because he was a fantastic human being and also a good goalkeeper, but if I had to choose between the two, Fraser Digby would be, I would have had Fraser Digby in a top team, not just Swindon Town. I would have had him in a top team. That's how good he was. But I see what John's saying about the football, and Glenn wanted to play football. It wasn't, the footballing goalkeepers changed once they changed the back pass rule. And I can't remember what year the back pass rule came in, where you couldn't pass it back anymore, or the keeper couldn't pick it up when you passed it back. Do you know what year that came in?
Yeah, it was around then. If I recall, that would have been about 90. Yeah, would have. Let me think. So I remember playing at the time. I was a goalkeeper of no particular regard, Mickey, but I do remember it had a massive impact on my ability, and any dreams I had of making it in the pro game just went right out the window because there was just no goalkeeping training on it back then. That would have been about 94, if I recall, about 94, 95.
I think that was probably about the time that Nicky started to force his way through, wasn't it? So, of course, once the no picking it up on the pass back rule came in, than most keepers. You know, if you take Manchester City for instance, they got rid of a good goalkeeper to bring this goalkeeper in who now is the best footballer. He could almost be a footballer outfield player. Yep. The goalkeeper they've got now, I mean, he's unbelievable on the ball. You know, and Manchester City without him wouldn't be the football team that they are, because it's almost like they've got 11 outfield players plus a goalkeeper. And Micky Hazard, to a much lesser degree, had that sort of impact because he had a good left foot and he was pretty good on the ball, and also a decent goalkeeper. So I suppose from Glenn and John's point of view, the benefits of having Micky in goal was twofold, in that the difference in sort of shot stopping wasn't that vast, but the difference in being a playmaker, if you like, could be quite big. So yeah, I understand why they made the decision they made.
Yeah. Well, look, okay, so the next guy, we've mentioned him loads already. You could build an entire show around this one guy in particular, the wonderful Glenn Hoddle. Now, I guess the best way I think we could kind of approach this, with half an eye on the clock and thinking, blimey, we're halfway through the squad. We've done about an hour on this already. But talk to me about what must have gone through your mind, or were there any stories, Micky? Were you aware when Ozzy was going out and Glenn was coming in that Glenn was coming in? And indeed, if you weren't aware, and I kind of doubt that you wouldn't have been aware, but what must you have been thinking? Were there any doubts that Glenn was going to be a success at Swindon?
No. I was aware he was coming in. A little bit apprehensive. I don't think anybody quite fully understands how difficult it is for a friend and a teammate to suddenly be managed. Let me rephrase that. To be managed by a friend, a teammate, and your hero. Mm-hmm. That's very tough. And I found it very tough because this guy coming in was my favourite footballer. He was my hero, my schoolboy hero. First time I went to Spurs, for instance, as a 14-year-old, I got to train with Glenn Hoddle. And I went home and said, I've just trained with the best player in the world at 14 years of age. So that's how I esteem. And then at 16, the Weekly Herald, which was the Spurs newspaper, they said that they did a big article on me calling me the next Glenn Hoddle. It made my absolute year to be classed as the next Glenn Hoddle. He was that special. And so I held him in such incredibly high esteem that suddenly here I was having a manager who was an incredible footballer, who was my hero, who had been a friend for however many years I was at Spurs. I can't recall exactly the number of years. He'd been there from the day I arrived till the day I left, or till the day he left. And suddenly this teammate, this friend, this hero that had always lived up to that, and always been your hero, and always been your friend, and always been your teammate, suddenly he was telling you how to play the game, or what he would expect from you tactically, and having to pull you aside and put you in your place if you're not doing the role he wanted you to do. Believe me, that was the toughest thing that I ever had to cope with, not just with Glenn, but also with Ozzy. But it was less of an impact with Ozzy because Ozzy didn't play as such. But with Glenn, it was incredibly tough. And I'm not even sure that I handled it very well. I mean, I played very well under Glenn, but I'm not sure that I handled that side of things, the off the field partnership between manager and player. I'm not sure I handled it as well as I should have, mainly because I held him in such incredibly high esteem. And as you know, when a son is managed by his father in under 11, under 12 football, the son finds it so much harder to take the advice of his father because it's his father. Well, Glenn was almost a father figure to me. And in fact, I play golf with him regularly on quite a regular basis now. And every time I stand on the first tee with Glenn, I feel a bit nervous because I'm playing golf with my hero. So I want to hit this incredible first shot because I want them to see how good a golfer I am. And more often than not, I hit a bad shot because I'm nervous. It's ridiculous.
So obviously, well, Mickey, look, I tweeted that what in Swindon terms has become stuff of folklore earlier, and I know you picked up on it, which was the exchange that you had when the guys were running the behind-the-scenes documentary of that promotion season. And there was what became, among Swindon fans, a very famous exchange between you and Glenn, when Glenn was digging out Sean Taylor for losing the ball in a defensive position. And then you see Sean's sort of defensive body language, his arms are folded. And then out the corner of the sort of shot comes this wonderfully quizzical Sunderland accent as Micky Hazard starts piling in on the great Glenn Hoddle's inability to just give it easy or punt it into Rose Ed. Do you still remember digging him out? And is that a good illustration of what you're talking about?
Yeah, I think it's a pretty good illustration of me maybe not handling him being my manager. I mean, would I have said that to Bobby Robson? Would I have said that to... I'm sure I would have, to be honest, because, again, it was... How I like in that argument, it was two purists, football purists, who... To boot the ball, okay, so to fit yourself into my mind, you need to understand first who I am and what I am. So for me to boot the ball means that it goes totally against the grain of how I believe football should be played. And that's not something that I sort of willingly admit to that, or deliberately admit to it, because I don't want to boot the ball at any point. It's an admission that the pressure that I was put under got the better of me. And I remember it well because I had three men coming at me, because the man that Glenn had ran towards me when he rolled the pass to me was Alan McLaughlin, travelled past Glenn to close me down. And there was two men coming at me from the front. So I remember shaping to whack it down the line and then dragging it back inside all three to create myself space on the inside. And that's, if you said to me now, if I found myself in the same position, what would I do? I would do the same. Because that's who I am. Because I'm not putting it in the stand. Because nobody is going to make me feel that much under pressure that I'm going to resort to something that I don't believe in. So that's my belief, my strong determination in how I believe the game should be played, rearing its ugly head. And then, of course, Glenn Hoddle, who was of a similar ilk and a similar belief, probably didn't want to put it in Rosehead either. So consequently, it became two players at loggerheads over, why didn't you put it into the stand? No, why didn't you? You know? So it became a battle of wills, because he was the manager, and really, you know, he has to be right. He's the manager. But ultimately, I've only been wrong once in my life, and that was in 1961. So the point I make is that we had two fierce characters, fierce people with fierce, strong beliefs in their abilities and in the way the game that should be played. So neither was prepared to give an inch and say, right, I'm going to put this into Rosehead, because I wasn't and Glenn wasn't. So it became, right, okay, well, I'm not going to put it in there, so I'm going to disguise my intentions, come inside three men, and then I'm going to give it back to you, Glenn, and you put it in Rosehead, but I'm not.
Well, what was wonderful about that particular segment was looking and reading the facial expressions and the body language of all your teammates around you. They kind of wanted the ground to sort of open up and swallow them. And I think everybody understood exactly what was going on and the subtext behind that conversation. One of the lads that was there that day, the next player I was going to talk about, went on to become an absolute superstar in a Swindon shirt, moved on to Man City for quite a lot of money, but a very young Kevin Horlock. So back then, we signed Kevin from West Ham as an half decent left back, but ended up becoming a free scoring midfielder at Swindon Town. Was he back then? Because it would be very easy for us to sort of slot him into that group of youngsters that we talked about. But did you know that there was more to Kevin? I mean, certainly there were more appearances. I mean, nearly 20 appearances in the Swindon shirt that season. But could you see that there was a proper player in the making there?
I think it's important that when you talk about Kevin Orlock, you talk about Paul Bowden having a wonderful left foot. I mean, it wasn't even close to Kevin Orlock's. Kevin Orlock had an absolute wand, and it's important to remember also that, with regard to percentage of right-footed players as against left-footed players within the English game, there was probably 10-1 right-footed players as against maybe more, maybe a lot more, in fact. So if you were a left-footer, you had a much better chance of being a top professional, because there were few and far between. And if you had a wand of a left foot and a reasonably good football brain, as Kevin had, then there was a very good chance that you were going to succeed at some level in this game. And I always say that, if I could pick my son and pick what foot he would kick with, I would say just give him a wand of a left foot. If you give him a wand of a left foot, he's got a much, much better chance of succeeding in the game. And Kevin Orlock went on to prove that. He had a good career, very good career. And there was things that maybe he didn't have. He wasn't lightning quick. And maybe that's why he got moved into the midfield, because defensively, you'll get more exposed for a lack of pace. So it became less apparent when he moved into midfield, and because he had a good touch and he was a good player, Kevin. So it didn't surprise me that Kevin made a good living in the game.
Well, there's a player that you would have seen against Northampton, similar player in the current Swindon setup, called Ellis Iandolo, Micky. I don't know whether you've given Ellis much attention, but almost identical for me. I mean, for a start, it's interesting because I've said a lot on Twitter. The situation Swindon Town finds itself in this current season actually is very similar to the season that you'll recall before we got promoted to the Premier League with the Leicester final and whatnot. We're in a similar spot. And interestingly, there are lots of interesting parallels across our current squad and that squad that you're talking about. And Ellis Iandolo is a similar player. Typically kind of pigeonholed as a left back. We've slotted him into left centre midfield. And he's, without a shadow of a doubt, he's going to go on to become one of our most influential players over the coming seasons. I've absolutely no doubt about it. Another player that you played alongside in that Swindon midfield, of course, kind of came out of nowhere. Initially rejoined the club, having had a spell as a young man, went off to Southend, was Martin Ling. Came in on trial. What were your immediate thoughts when Lingy pitched up? Because I remember seeing his first goal on his return. If I recall, it was a cracker against Millwall at the county ground under the floodlights. But what can you tell us about Lingy?
Well, when Lingy arrived at the club, you could see he had ability. You could see he was quite quick as well. You could see he could run all day. I never thought he would have the physique to succeed certainly at the highest level anyway. And sometimes the lower you go in that era, it became more physical. So I thought he would struggle physically. Again, the system and style of play helped Martin develop into the player that he became, because the physicality of the game became less important.
Micky, you've gone very quiet, mate.
Have I gone quiet?
Oh, you're back now.
Oh, sorry. I moved the phone a little bit further away. So, players like Martin were allowed to develop and flourish, again, because of the style of play that was preached at Swindon Town Football Club, and by Glenn Hoddle in particular, because obviously he didn't have to fight to get on the ball. The ball was fed to him through the various lines, and he got lots of the ball without having to to kick bollock and bite to get it. So that enabled him to flourish. And so all my fears when he first arrived, what a good player he is, but is he physically going to be able to compete? My fears became unfounded because the system that we played, the style, that helped Martin to flourish and show off what a good player he really was.
Okay, so you talk about players that could compete. I'm going to talk about a two-footed player that absolutely can compete, and I'll probably give it away by saying the two-footed player. Ross McLaren, underrated somewhat by Swindon player, and often forgotten when we talk about the greats in Swindon, in a Swindon Town shirt. What did you? So my recollections were whenever there was an issue or Glenn took a knock, you always saw Ross sort of slot in and kind of fill that gap. Or whenever Glenn bombed on, you always saw Ross drop in and fill that gap. I mean, that in itself is testament to what a decent player Ross was, isn't it? The fact that, you know, he was filling holes that were being left by the great Glenn Hoddle. But what were your recollections of Big Ross?
Big Ross, number one, incredible character. Someone who was a ready-made captain if Colin wasn't around. Captain on the basis that totally different to Colin in that if he needed to rook you, he would rook you. Didn't matter who you were. I had a few run-ins with Ross. Absolute great character. Loved him. Really good friend of mine when I was playing for Swindon. Unbelievable range of pass. That's why he fitted into Glenn's way of, you know, if Glenn was injured, Ross just slipped back there and he could ping it all over the show either foot. Really, really good player, hard, good in the air, good tackler, bit big, and my everlasting memory of Ross McLaren, if you don't mind me saying, and I do find it funny, was that every Friday after training, we would go back to I think it was the Holiday Inn Hotel, because Ross was a little bit heavy. So we would go back to the hotel and would go and Ross would put a sauna suit on and go and sit in the sauna for half an hour to lose some weight before the game on a Saturday. It was hilarious, honestly. So he would be sitting in this sauna for half an hour. Sometimes he'd ride a bike in there, you know, so that he'd be in a really good weight when we got to the match on a Saturday. But what a good player. I have to say that.
He purred, didn't he? And again, Glenn was always very clear about what Ross brought to the team. Was similar to you, similar to Martin, very different physique, as you say, different type of player. But the key was the fact that he had two very, very good feet. Like he could go both ways, and that was a key thing about that whole spine of the team, wasn't it?
Yeah, we were very blessed with two-footed players. Glenn was incredibly two-footed. I was incredibly two-footed. John Moncur was incredibly two-footed. In a very skillful way, also, not just in a passing range, but in that we could do skills and beat players with either foot. John Moncur, Glenn, and myself. But then you had Ross, whose range of pass with either foot was equally as good as ours. While he didn't have he wasn't agile enough to have that ability to dance past players with either foot, but he would use both his technique on both feet to. In fact, I'll go as far as to say that Ross McLaren, if he'd had less problems with his weight and was more nimble and a bit quicker, Ross would have been a top, and I mean a top player, playing for a top club. He was that good a footballer, and he had that good a range of pass. But you know, I always say that when God makes a footballer, He doesn't just make a footballer and say, right, he's got no flaws. God gives you flaws as well as talents. And I look at myself and I see, right, okay, he gave me lots of talent, very gifted in both feet. I could dribble, I could pass, I could do skills, I could see the pass, I had vision, awareness. But he gave me flaws. And one of the flaws was my sort of rebelliousness to liking any style of playing other than the beautiful game. And what you achieve is how you cope with your flaws, not how you handle your talents.
Yeah.
And I didn't handle my flaws very well because I only wanted to play one way, so I would rebel against playing any other way. So I never conquered that flaw in my whole career. Maybe later on down the line, I learned that if I wasn't having a great game on the ball, I still had a role to play. I could still be, if I'm great on the ball, I'm going to be a 9.5 out of 10. But if I was having a stinker on the ball, I'd be a 5 out of 10. Whereas towards the end of my career, if I was having a bad one on the ball, I could still be a 7.5 out of 10 by the work and the effort and the other side of the game that I added to my game. So if I'd learnt that when I was younger, maybe I would have fulfilled my talents. But unfortunately, that rebelliousness, that flaw that God gave me, I didn't overcome. And the same with Ross. Ross had that weight problem. He had that nimbleness problem. And whether he could have conquered it or not, I don't know. But if he did, I'm certainly would have been a top player at a top club.
So you talk about God giving us flaws and God giving us sort of certain gifts. Well, the next player I want to talk to you about, 23 gifts he gave us that season. But if God could create great goals and great sounding goals, Micky, then he gave that gift to a certain Craig Maskell. Now, here's the question for you. You were on the bench at the time Craig Maskell scored his opener at Wembley. I want to know whether you heard the thud off the post from the bench, just like I did in the stand.
No, I couldn't remember that. I couldn't remember anyway. I didn't even know he got the first goal. The thing was that I'd sort of had a cartilage operation towards the end of the season. And every time I played or I trained, my knee would swell up because I was so desperate to get back playing that I never really did put the work in building my thigh back up to take the stress off my knee. So if I played a game like when we played at Birmingham away, 1-6-4, for 2 days later, I was sort of icing my knee, trying to get it back down to some, so I was incredibly disappointed to miss out on the biggest game of my Swindon era, because obviously my knee, Glenn pulled me and he said, "Look, Mick, you're struggling with your knee still." And I was more than fine with it. Never complained. I wanted to play, desperate to play, but I appreciated that the knee was causing me problems, and sometimes I wasn't as mobile as I could be. Sorry, what was the question?
No, so we were talking about Craig Maskell. So Maskell is Craig is or the goal itself. I mean, Craig is definitely remembered as one of the greats at Swindon. He scored an awful lot of goals that season.
He did,
and actually, before he moved on to Southampton, when we got up to the Prem, he was respectable, but you could see it was probably a level too far for him. But his movement and his finish for it was the second goal that day. So Glenn had obviously opened the scoring, and then John Moncur's played Craig Maskell in, and Craig has arrowed the ball into the top right-hand corner across Kevin Poole. And it is the most glorious thud off the post that I think I've ever heard in football. But you're saying, look, obviously from your vantage point, it's something that just it just doesn't really figure. It's not something that
I think because you're jumping off your seat, you're celebrating, so you're not fully aware of really what you're doing, really, or your surroundings. You're just celebrating, But Craig Maskell, for instance, he was a brilliant finisher, Craig. And if I was to liken Craig to anybody, I would liken them to Gary Lineker, a lesser version of Gary Lineker, obviously. But when I watched Gary Lineker play, you could almost hardly see him. He'd be very quiet, and then all of a sudden he's got 2 goals, and that was Craig Maskell. He never played a massive part in the role of the team play, but you put a chance into him, and it was in the back of the net. He rarely fluffed it. He was a brilliant finisher. Again, he had a great left foot, but he was a brilliant finisher. His movement, his awareness of the space, For a midfielder like myself or like Glenn, he knew where he wanted to be, and you knew where he was going, and it was much easier to play the pass. And obviously, if you put that ball where he wanted it, it was in the back of the net. Simple as that. So he reminded me of Lineker, a lesser version of Lineker, but the impact that
you say, beautiful finisher. And now, interestingly, so the season before, when we had lost Big Duncan, Glenn had gone back to your old club and brought in Terry Gibson, hoping that Gibbo was going to relive some former glories and bring goals to the team. Didn't quite work. And then at the start of this season, he brought a relative unknown in from Chelsea reserves, Dave Mitchell, who on arrival, I was convinced was Eric Clapton. Now, you tell me, Mickey, about Dave Mitchell, because from what I understand, quite a character. Australian international, but as Colin Calder would also like to tease him about, he was convinced he was a Scotsman. So tell me about Mitch, because I'm told he was a larger than life character. He was quite a lad in the dressing room.
To be honest, I always thought Dave Mitchell was Scottish. But I was with them at Chelsea in Chelsea Reserve. Dave Mitchell had phenomenal pace, and Dave was a good lad. And another player that really could have made more of his career, because he was, when you've got that type of pace and you're a centre forward, it's scary. I always remember him getting the 3 goals at Birmingham when we come back to win 6-4. And Mitch often was a key cog. And not many people are probably aware of this fact, or not many people who don't understand football. Mitch was a cog in our team because his pace scared defences. Okay, so that then made defences drop deeper, which then created the space in the midfield for the likes of Moncur, me, Oddle. So we would have more space to play because of their fear of his pace. So he was quite an important cog. Without any involvement whatsoever in the game, he would create space for the likes of us to flourish, because they were afraid of him. And he was a great foil for Maskell, because Maskell wasn't particularly quick. Duncan Shearer wasn't particularly quick. So Mitch became a great foil and probably played a part. Forget the goals that he scored. He probably played a part in helping the Shearers of this world, the Steve Whites of this world, and the Craig Maskells of this world score a lot of goals, because opposition defences were afraid of his pace. So consequently, were more worried about the spacing behind than actually picking up the players that they needed to pick up. So Mitch played an important role in helping that team play with the quality that it played with, because of his pace. Because Jan Fjortov, for instance, a little bit later, didn't have pace to run in behind. Duncan didn't have the pace to run in behind. Theirs was more clever movement. But Mitchell could just bomb in behind Dave, and once he was on a road, you couldn't stay with him. He was that quick, and got goals. But I'm certain that he was a more important cog in the team than actually was credited at the time, because of his pace.
As I think actually bore out in the Premier League, although. I mean, he left for, the fee that we got for him was buttons, just like the fee that we paid for him when he joined. But the impact in terms of losing him from the team, I think with time, people reflect back on our season in the Premier League, and he is one of the names that comes up relatively quickly. What might have happened if we kept to Colin, if we kept to Dave Mitchell? It's nice that time's been kind to him, because I always a player that I massively rated. Never you never got the impression natural goal scorer.
Of a lion as well.
Yeah.
His heart was massive. He would run and run and run all day long. He would compete. He never gave up. He was a good player, Dave Mitchell, and particularly in that team, because we had so many good ball players, and so many creative players for a small club like Swindon, that we needed someone to be able to make those runs to benefit the flair creative players that we had. And Dave Mitchell was that boy.
So to what we talked about, never having anyone join the club that felt like a threat to you. The next guy I'm going to bring up, when we signed Johnny Moncur, Mickey, I thought that he was going to be a lad that was going to put the heat under you, having not really understood the kind of player that John Moncur was. What you would have obviously been aware of him, I'm guessing, from your time at Spurs. What were your views when we signed him?
Well, he was a good player. I mean, when John was 12 years of age, I tipped him for the top. He was very, very talented as a youngster, and it surprised me that he never broke through at Spurs, because Spurs were going through a relative era of sort of quietness when John was sort of 20, 21, 22. And really, with the talent he had, he should have broke through at Spurs. But I never doubted that he would go on and make a name for himself in the game and stay in the game over a long period of time, because you don't have that type of talent and not make. He was 2-footed. He had skill. He had a nasty streak inside of him. He wasn't hard. He wasn't a great tackler, but he had a streak that he would do you if he needed to. So very good player, John. Did I consider him a threat? No. Not one bit. I always felt that John would be miles better with me in the team. He needed someone to feed him. I was sort of closest one to him who could feed him, as did Martin Ling. So I was probably the playmaker of the team who would get on the ball more than anyone else, and bring other people into the game. So yeah, I never considered John or Martin threats to me. I have to be honest, and I'm not being conceited or big-headed. I'm being honest. I felt my only threat was my age. That one day would catch up with me. And as long as I stayed fit and didn't get injured, I felt like I could play for a good few years. But then I left Swindon, went back to Spurs, and it was a doddle playing in the Premier League, I've got to be honest. But I then started to pick up a few injuries. And I got a couple of really bad ones, and it took me a lot longer than I needed to recover. And then when I recovered, I got injured straight away. And I maintain to this day that if I'd never got those two injuries, I could have played till I was 37, 38, no problem. But once I got those injuries, I started to pick up injury on injury, because my body, obviously, in the 6-week period that I was out, and then when I come back, I got another 6 weeks. So I was out 12 weeks. My body obviously was getting weaker. I'd lost a bit of fitness and sharpness, so I was always struggling to regain the pace of the game that I needed at that age. I was coming up to 36, and that's when I decided. I was offered a 2-year contract by Birmingham, and I turned it down because I didn't want the travelling backwards and forwards to Birmingham anymore, and I'd just gone through a period of injury. But Moncur was always going to be a better player with me in the side. I think he will tell you that as well. And with Glenn, Moncur, and me in the side, we had 3 flair, creative players who had the key to the door. We could unlock the door, and obviously, when you're in the amount of possession that Swindon team would have, teams would be very defensive against us. So you always need someone who could unlock the door, who could see that eye of the needle pass and open it up, or produce some magic himself. And we were fortunate at Swindon that we had Glenn, myself, and John Moncur who could do it.
Well, now, okay, so the next player, Mickey, we're down to our last 3 that I'm going to talk to you about, right? But the next player kind of touches on something you mentioned earlier about lads and dads in football, and how difficult it can be. If say, for example, the dad is the manager of the team. Now, this player wasn't burdened with that, but nonetheless, he was burdened by the fact that his dad was, both in Swindon terms and then in his greater career terms, greatness. Mike Summerby, of course, his son, Nicky. So the great David Kerslake moves off to Leeds United for £1 million odd. And that leaves a window of opportunity on the right-hand side. And in comes Buzzer. Now, what talk me through it. I mean, did he? Because to me, he just seemed to take take to that like a duck to water. It was almost like, well, we know he's good enough to do it. Was it like that behind the scenes? Did you guys all have faith that Buzzer was ready to step up?
It's a great question. Was I sure? No, because at the time of watching him in training and watching him in the reserves, he wasn't a right fullback. I think the decision to move him to right fullback was a genius decision, and I really felt like that sort of gave him the time to flourish. It gave him the space and the time on the ball to adjust to the pace of that level, and it enabled him to grow and become a player that eventually got to move to Manchester City, where his dad had obviously been successful. But
well, Micky, do you know? Sorry to interrupt, but it is that point, isn't it? Like the crazy thing about Nicky is he had to step out of his dad's shadow at Swindon because his dad's a legend at our place. And then he's gone and done it again at Man City. Now, surely, if that is greatness personified, that's got to be an indicator of it. What mental strength that kid must have had to be able to do that at both clubs, where his dad raised the bar at both clubs.
I'm not so sure it's mental strength, to be honest. If you know Nicky as I'd got to know him very, very well, and I'm sure maybe you did too, I think that Nicky was probably oblivious to the fact that his son was a superstar. His dad was a superstar at Swindon, superstar at Manchester City. He was that sort of laid-back character who I genuinely believe that he hadn't given that a thought. Whether or
You're being kind, Micky, aren't you? You're being very kind.
I'm trying to be kind to Nicky because I genuinely believe it wasn't mental strength that enabled him to cope with that. I genuinely believe that he was oblivious to it. He was that character who was a sort of he was a really funny, naturally funny character. I loved him to bits. I had many a good time with Nicky, and he was. This is not. I'm not being critical of him, but he almost bordered on sometimes. Like, duh. He's not like that. He's actually quite an intelligent boy, but he sort of gave off that impression, that laid-back character who didn't really think about what was going on all around him, so therefore wouldn't be aware of what his dad had achieved at either club. So consequently, it made life so much easier for him to be a success within his own right, without the fear of living in his dad's shadow.
Yeah, and it must have actually been easier for him with that mindset as well, to not be overawed by being managed by someone like Glenn Hoddle.
Yeah, I hope I've explained that well, because I don't mean that Nicky's thick
you've made
or
perfect
stupid
sense
in any way, shape, or form.
Yeah,
not in the slightest. What I mean was he had that temperament or that personality that maybe he chose not to focus on it, chose not to ignore it, but he almost felt like he probably wasn't even aware his dad was a footballer. And that's
just sort of got on with it.
Yes, that somehow helped Nicky achieve what he achieved, because sometimes the burden of and the weight on your shoulders of your dad being, I know because my sons were really, really good footballers, but every time they played, it was, they were like 14 years of age. And I'd hear people say, well, they're not as good as their dad, are they? Well, why would they be? They're 14. You're judging me as the finished article when I was winning trophies, UEFA Cup and FA Cup. 14-year-olds never going to be that good. So they had to live with that all their young careers. And maybe it became a burden for them in the end. I don't know, but I think it probably did. But Nicky never had to endure that because not that people wouldn't say it, but Nicky probably wouldn't have heard them say it.
Yeah, and to go back to my point about Glenn Hoddle, for example, if you're of a particular mindset where, you are going to be starstruck or you're going to be thinking about anything other than your game, because I reflect on some of those youngsters that you were talking about that we discussed right at the start of the show. And I wonder how many of those youngsters would have benefited from having a mindset that was akin to Nicky. where actually, listen, I'm just going to concentrate on my game, my business, just get my head down, forget that that's Glenn Hoddle over there, that's Micky Hazard over there, that's Johnny Moncur over there. I'm just gonna get on with it. I'm going to be oblivious to it. I wonder how many of those, because they were all the same kind of peer group that came up together. But if you look at the number of appearances, I mean, Nicky had over 40 appearances that season. You compare that to, for example, the peers of his, such as your Wayne O'Sullivans and your Eddie Murrays. They didn't get near him, did they, really?
No.
And as you said yourself, they were all like decent footballers.
Yeah, you're absolutely spot on in that Nicky's oblivious to it, oblivious to the fact that this is Glenn Hoddle, the greatest, one of the greatest. He sort of helped him succeed. He's oblivious to his dad, to who he was playing with. He was playing with people who played at the top of the game and won trophies at the top of the game, and yet was probably totally unaware of the people that had achieved this. And that is somehow that helped Nicky rather than hindered him. Whereas maybe some of the other youngsters never got to grips with the fact that, wow, this is Glenn Hoddle. I'm playing with Glenn Hoddle, one of the greatest. Whereas Nicky sort of...
He took it all in his stride, Micky, didn't he?
Yeah, he took it in his stride.
Took it all in his stride.
Back. He was the same on the night out. We sometimes we went out together, me and Nicky, and it was just like whatever happened. There was no plan. There was no, and he was great company. I loved him.
Well, talking about that word "love" again, God, that came up quite a bit at the start of the show. But okay, our penultimate player, Micky, absolute colossus at the back, signed as we now know out of Glenn Hoddle's own pocket. Sean Taylor. Now, what an absolute ledge at Swindon Town. The best header of a football I think I've ever seen in a red shirt for a start. But talking about taking it like a duck to water, when he first arrived, I remember going to see the pre-season friendly against Real Sociedad, and I remember thinking, blimey, like this is just your bog standard lower league footballer. But by Christ, by the time Sean's time at Swindon Town came to an end, he'd really developed, for a guy that was further down the line in his career, he'd really developed his game on the floor as well. What were your recollections of Big Sean?
Very much how you've described it. When he arrived, he was took out of water. He was being asked to do things that maybe were very foreign to him, because he'd never played in a team that had played with this sort of fast, free-flowing football on the ground. Sean would have always been throughout his career, and I don't know, but I'm sure that Sean would have been asked to win his headers defensively at one end, and in the other end try and score a few goals in the box. Whereas when he came to Swindon, suddenly he was asked to perform on the floor as well, and to be part of this wonderful football that we played. And just because that wasn't his game, there was, you weren't allowed to get away with it. But in an odd sort of way, while it was the weakest part of Sean's game, in an odd way, the style that we preached, the style that we played, actually developed Sean so much quicker to become a colossus in defence, winning headers both sides, scored quite a lot of goals as well, important goals at both ends. He was brave as a lion, he had the heart the size of a lion, but he developed so much over a period of time on the floor. And that's the beauty of the style that you preach as a manager. If you preach the wonderful flowing passing game, it involves all 11 players, and all 11 players have to be responsible to receive the ball. They have to be able to receive it. They have to make angles to receive it, and that puts an onus on all 11 players to be available. So even if it's not your strength, you're still expected to make an angle, because even if you make an angle and you don't get the ball, you might be occupying someone to stop you from getting the ball, which then creates space somewhere else for someone else. So it's important that all 11 players within the framework of that style are wanting the ball and making angles to receive the ball. And Sean benefited massively. I mean, the development in Sean over a 2-year period was colossal. I mean, it was absolutely colossal.
Yeah.
He went from being someone who was absolutely amazing in the air and brave as a lion, but who wasn't really that good on the floor. And he went from being that type of player to suddenly people were talking about him being a cultured centre back. You know, and that's credit to Sean, because when you are used to playing one way, and then suddenly you're being asked to do something that's foreign to you, it takes a lot of guts and a lot of courage to actually work hard to improve in that area, but also to keep showing and wanting the ball at all times. And credit where credit's due, he achieved that, and by the end, and rightly so, we will go down in Swindon's history as one of their best ever centre backs, no doubt.
Without a shadow of a doubt. Well, while we're talking about people that go down in history, Micky, now we come to the final player on this squad list that I'm going to ask you to dissect for me tonight. A guy that has pretty much he scored goals at every single level for Swindon Town, and it was amazing to see him also turn out and not do himself a massive disservice, although he's always quite humble about what he did for us in the Premier League. But I'm just going to ask you this one question about this guy, because he was on with the supporters club last week, and by Vic Morgan's own admission, this gentleman needs 3-4 shows given the amount of time he was at Swindon Town and the stories that he's got. So I'm just going to ask you one question. Wembley 93, did he dive Steve Chalky White?
Steve Chalky White.
Was it a dive?
Nothing Steve Chalky White. Nothing Steve Chalky White ever did would surprise me. I have to say, of all the players in my life that I feel, and there's very few players that I feel in my lifetime that I played with fulfilled the very maximum that they could achieve with the ability they had, was Steve Chalky White and Gary Mabbott. Gary Mabbott went on to become an absolute legend, right? And I've never known anybody fulfill his talents to the point of his maximum. And he goes down in history as one of Tottenham's probably 20 best ever players. And then you've got Steve Chalky White, who did the same at Swindon. Wasn't the greatest player in the world in terms of ability, but God, he knew where the goal was. Heart, God, he was a winner. He had a heart the size of a lion, but he worked and worked and worked. He was the fittest player I've probably ever played with. He worked and worked and worked, and he gave everything he had to maximise everything that he had. There wasn't one part of his game that he didn't maximise his potential. I have the utmost admiration for him, because some players, Glenn Hull's the greatest player, one of the greatest players I've ever seen. And it's easy to talk about Glenn and say, oh, what a player. But then when you look at Glenn Hull, you say, well, Glenn should have been the best player in the world. He was that great. He wasn't. But what a player. But then you look at someone like Steve White, who took every ounce of what he had and fulfilled it to its max. If you don't admire someone like that, then you're a mug.
Yeah, well, without a shadow of a doubt. And I'll tell you what, Micky, Chalky is revered at Swindon Town, but I would go so far as this. Chalky is arguably one of the top 5 most important players to have ever pulled on a shirt at Swindon Town Football Club. Not only for the sheer volume of goals that he scored and what he brought to the club in terms of his willingness to engage with fans, but it's the pivotal moments of which that Chalky stepped up. And we talk about, I kind of tongue-in-cheek ask you about the circumstances around the penalty in '93. But then we've got, a few seasons prior, we've got 2 goals at Selhurst Park that essentially just kept the momentum going as Swindon were rising up through the leagues. And I mean, just an utter goal machine. I mean, you talked about the game at Sunderland where you were in the stands, the Wembley game against Sunderland. Yeah. He's very, very unlucky that day. He's missed a couple of absolute sitters that on another day he would have, he would have just gobbled up. But a hugely influential character at Swindon Town Football Club.
No doubt, a character. One of the strangest, greatest characters I've ever seen in the game. Nothing, and I mean nothing. No form of banter would ever get him down. No stick. You could shout at them as hard as you wanted to shout at him. Nothing would sway him from his job in hand in his head. He was an absolute inspiration as an example. If you're any kid looking on, then it's easy to look at Glenn Hoddle and say, I want to be Glenn Hoddle, or I want to be Micky Hazard, or I want to be whoever, as a Swindon fan. If you're looking on as a true inspiration, then look to Steve White and look no further, because he fulfilled everything and more that his talents would allow him to fulfill. And as a youngster looking on, he's evidence and proof that you don't have to be the most talented player in the world to make it to succeed. But what you have to have, you have to have the desire, the passion, the will to succeed, and a certain amount of ability to score goals. And use him as your example, as your shining light, because his attitude was as good an attitude as I've seen in any player I've ever played with, in terms of his desire to succeed. If he wasn't in the team, sometimes when I weren't in the team, I used to think, well, your loss. You'll be coming back for me soon when you need me, But he wasn't. He would get out the team, and he'd probably spend 6 weeks out the team. But while he was out the team, he was given 500% in training. He was scoring goals, and every time he scored a goal, he said, "See, that's what you're missing on Saturday." The desire was just unbelievable. I have the utmost admiration for Steve Chalky White, and that's saying that he's not my favourite type of player. I'm the skillful player, creative players that I love. But as an inspiration, as a youngster looking on, use Steve White as your inspiration, even if you're gifted and talented, like Glenn Hoddle, like Micky Hazard, because Micky Hazard, with Steve White's desire and passion and attitude, and maybe would have had 100 England caps.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that would be. It would be interesting if we could. I mean, if it was a different time, I would love to have seen Chalky sort of, in the Jack Charlton era, discover some Irish heritage and end up getting himself a cap or two. His career. That's probably the only thing that's really missing from his career is that international recognition. Well, listen, Micky, that is our squad of 93. Now, there are 2 questions that I've been asked if I could kindly put to you. The first one is from Swindon Spartan, has asked me to ask you, have you heard from Ozzy, and how is he? Is he on the mend? Because we're all thinking about it.
Spoke to Ozzy today. He's out of hospital. He's at home. He's resting. He's in no pain whatsoever, although very fatigued because he obviously had a serious heart operation. He's in great spirits. He was joking about playing golf, and I said, "Oh well, Oz, if you want to play golf, we're playing tomorrow. We only got out of hospital on Monday." So he's doing really well. He's in no pain. Obviously, he's got a period of recovery now and rest. But absolute operation was a massive success, and we're really, really pleased with his progress. And as I said, I spoke to him today, and he said he can't believe that he's in no pain whatsoever. So brilliant news.
It is wonderful news. Well, look, please do send in my best regards and that.
We will do.
Connected with our football club, Micky. As you will know, I don't need to tell you, he's hugely, hugely well regarded, still in SM1. And we send him nothing but love and best wishes for a speedy recovery. The other question I've been asked to pose to you is from Sid on Twitter, who has asked, what are your thoughts on the current Swindon Town lineup, and do you think we're going to get promoted this season?
Do you want me to lie, or do you want me to tell the truth?
You tell the truth, Micky.
I don't really know too much about the Swindon team, to be honest. I've been invited down to a game by, I think, one of the, is it the new commercial manager? She invited me to the Manchester City game, but unfortunately, my partner got COVID, so I had to miss it. She's asked, strangely enough, a couple of days ago if I'd be happy to come down and do a game soon. So I said yes, I'm more than happy to do it. But other than that, I don't know too much about it. I don't know how good they are. I saw them at Northampton this season. They looked a really good side. I liked what the manager was trying to preach, the style. He was playing it through the lines. He was playing it on the floor. They played very well at Northampton and could have easily won that game. I think it was a 1-1 draw. But I was very impressed with Swindon that day. So I don't know whether they're going to get promotion or not. I hope so, because I love Swindon. Is Tottenham was my first love, but Swindon was possibly as good as I had. An absolutely fantastic time at Swindon. It was a beautiful family club that was fitted in well with my personality, my character. I loved my time there. I loved living down there for the 3 years I was there. I had a wonderful time. I lived in Marlborough. I had a really nice time. I have nothing but fond, happy memories of my time at Swindon. And I won't have a bad word said about the club because it was a really lovely sort of twilight to my career, if you like. But I can't comment with a regard to whether we're going to, because I've not seen enough of them to say whether they will or they won't, or whether they're good or they're bad. The one game that I did see them, I was very impressed. But that's not enough to make a judgment on whether they will or won't get promotion.
Yeah, well, Mickey, like I said to you earlier in the show, I think if you cast your mind back to Swindon Town 91-92, the season when Duncan Shearer could have gone on to smash goal scoring records, we're in a similar kind of spot with some of the same problems. And
except there's a big difference in that season. The problem within the club at that time, we had a team more than capable of getting promotion, but the financial irregularities of the season before, when they got relegated, that was a hangover. That left a big hangover with in and around the club, and it was almost like a knock-on effect. The mentality of being demoted for financial irregularities had an impact on the performances of the team the following season, and it led to a season whereby it was very, very difficult to perform. And in the end, Ozzy left. It was a tough year that year. So the team today hasn't really got that problem, or that mental sort of block, if you like. Subconsciously, I mean, I wasn't aware of it, but obviously all the other players were part of it. They experienced it more than I did, but I was aware of what they were feeling.
I think the issue that we've got this year, there are actually similarities, Mickey, off the back of, whilst we haven't got an enforced demotion, we are under transfer embargoes. There has been a change of ownership. The future's looking brighter. And I think from a playing point of view, I think the parallel I would draw this season versus 91-92 is that you could see that the model's not quite complete. So I personally, it's still all to play for, and we're within touching distance of the playoffs. But I've got a feeling it'll end up going like 91-92, and next season we're going to do something really special. So keep them peeled, Mickey. Listen, Mickey, the only thing that I wanted to kind of finish on in a nice circular narrative, as I like to do, is just take you back to what I said at the start. Listen, on a personal level, mate, if there's no Micky Hazard, there's no me, there's no Mark Hanrahan enjoying his football. I can't thank you enough. You've had the most wonderful career. There are many things you've been very humble about, and you've talked about in terms of what might have been in relation to your career. But I know I'm not alone, and I know there are thousands of Spurs and Swindon Town fans in particular that think similar things to me. You're an absolute inspiration. You're a wonderful footballer, but you're also a fine human being. And I mean, I've not even had to talk to you about the amount of time we've taken up with you tonight. You're an incredibly generous spirit. You love talking football. And there's so much more that I could have gone on and talked to you about. I hope you won't be a stranger, mate, and you'll come back on at some point. And
absolutely.
Whether that's answering the daftest of daft questions.
Can I just say before we part,
Of course.
You know, I was brought up by my parents to be kind, to be caring, and to help others. Two reasons. One, because there's people out there far worse off than we are. And kindness is the route to a better world. But also, one day down the line, I might need someone to be kind to me when I'm struggling. So it sort of works in circles. If we're all kind as we go along, you know, everything that we do in our lives, kindness, we're kind to someone, we care for someone, we smile at someone, it'll all be reciprocated one day. One day someone will be kind to us, one day someone will care for us, one day someone will smile at us. So that's my outlook on life. I try to help as many people as I can. I don't broadcast it. I don't publicize a lot of the work that I do because I don't need to. I'm doing it because I want to do it, because my parents brought me up to do it. There's no need to broadcast it. Some things have to be broadcast. If you want to raise funds, then you need to put it out there to get people to donate. But in general, you know, the kinder we are as people, the kind of world we will live in, and that's how I try to live my life.
Well, Micky, you're certainly doing that, and somebody. As I say, you're royalty to our show, bud. You've got an open invite to come back anytime, and you are much missed down at Swindon Town, Micky, as well. Don't be a stranger. Although next time you and I cross paths playing charity football matches, I won't let you warm me up, and I won't let you ping 30-yard free kicks into the top corner and embarrass me in front of the
town. You won't
have
a choice.
Right. Look, Micky, Tyler and I are going to end up. We're going to now start talking about Harrogate and Swindon Town over the Easter period, mate. You are more than welcome to hang around, but equally, you're more than happy to slip off. And
guys,
please do come back at some point. It has been utterly.
I will do anytime you need me. Just give me a call, guys. It's been a pleasure on the show. I've loved it. Tell all the people who are listening, thank you for listening in, and hopefully, I'll see you down at the town one day, pretty soon.
Let's hope you're right, Micky. Take good care, buddy. Thanks for everything.
See you soon, guys. Bye.
Ta-ra, buddy.
Bye.
Right, Tyler. I mean, where do you start? I mean, some of the players that we've talked about and some of the experiences that you hear Micky sort of talking about there. I mean, it's proper legendary stuff, isn't it? What did you make of it all? I mean, as usual, those sort of segments, you don't tend to get a word in edgeways. A, because we're talking about something that was way before your time as a supporter, but B, just you could literally wind Micky up and just listen to him all night, couldn't you?
For me, it's more winding you up, but you know, no, I mean, for those sort of ones, I do just tend to sit back and let you have your waffle away, because the Charlie Austin one meant a lot to me, because obviously he's my first football idol, whereas Micky Hazard means a lot to you because he's one of the ones who sort of got you into football. So it's one of them. We take it in turns.
Yeah, I mean, I'll tell you, the funny thing about Micky Hazard, I mean, it really, really is a fascinating career, because like I said, I grew up in a house full of Tottenham Hotspur supporters, and it was my family in Swindon that sort of lured me down to SM1 to watch football, and I never looked back after my first live experience. But Micky Hazard was one of those players that I just remember being like a dazzling footballer on the deck in an era of very direct, very kind of like gritty England football. So in the same way that people talk about Glenn Hoddle only getting 56 England caps and that being an absolute travesty, the fact that Micky Hazard, hardly figured for England, despite the fact that he was, capped right the way through all the levels. I mean, that in itself was a travesty. But I never forget when we signed him. So we signed him a couple, essentially, if I recall, a couple of months before the great Alan McLaughlin left for £1 million to Southampton, and I remember thinking, God, when Macca left, I was like, well, there's your kind of ready-made replacement. But it was a very, very different type of footballer, very, very different. But just the things that guy couldn't do when he had the ball at his feet. But the issue that he had were the players around him. And then as the seasons progressed and we moved on to 91-92 and then the 92-93 season, he was suddenly surrounded by these incredible two-footed footballers who he could give the ball to, get it back. They could, like, some of the intricate passing and moving. I mean, it really... I mean, I said to someone earlier today on Twitter, I think it was Tans on Twitter today, I just said, look, I wish I could have had that era of supporting again, because I wasn't too much younger than what you are now. And I wish I could look at that football again for a 45-year-old's eyes and really appreciate it and understand the context of it. I guess particularly off the back of, you know, the best part of the last sort of, you know, 25 odd years that ain't, let's be honest, they ain't been that great with the odd exception here and there. But I mean, you really are talking about whenever there would be a televised Swindon game. I remember a very famous like FA Cup match against Aston Villa. And all of the commentary was around the fact that Swindon were famed for a certain style of football. Micky pretty much represented that style of football. You know, we became revered for being, you know, innovators at that time. And, you know, obviously anyone that's read Glenn Hoddle's book will hopefully pick up on the fact that, you know, he, even when he was an England manager, he was an innovator when it came to tactics. And Rio Ferdinand has really talked that up. You know, when he was rising up through the England team, how he benefited. And I mean, what an era. I mean, that the Tottenham team of the early 80s through to the late 80s was, you know, whilst it was a little bit like watching a Amir Khan box with a glass jaw, they were just dazzling to watch. And yeah, to have midfielders of the ilk of Glenn Hoddle, Micky Hazard pulling the strings in the same side. I mean, wow. Like, but as I say, victims of an era. So, well, hopefully you enjoyed that. Hopefully you enjoyed that, Si, and I'm sure people are going to enjoy listening to Micky's input on what was arguably our greatest side in living memory that took us up to the Premier League. But we step away from that and we start. Let's have a quick chat about what we've got to look forward to over the Easter period, mate. So you got your tickets in the bag for Friday. How you feeling?
Excited. I'm always excited, Mark. You know this. I bought. Well, I say I bought. Mate asked me if I wanted to do Hartlepool in a couple of weeks. So I said if he buys my ticket, I'll do it. So I'm off to Hartlepool now as well.
Oh, very nice too. So we've got a new ground to look forward to, haven't we, over the Easter period? So you've got it in the bag. I noticed today on the WhatsApp group you got your travel plans bolted on. There's been some talk of Harry McCurdy being back in earnest. Do you think we're going to see him back, or do you think we're going to see him on the bench for Friday?
I think it'll be bench job on Friday, 20 minutes or so in the legs, and then the big return Monday.
Yeah. Now I'm actually feeling pretty optimistic about Friday, to be totally frank. I think I've been banging on about rhythm and fitness and getting those things turning. I mean, we spoke to Johnny Smith's dad, didn't we, about this 2-3 weeks ago now, about when you've got quality players returning from injury, that, you know, sometimes it takes 3-4 games to them to go up, you know, get up through the gears. And I'm of the opinion that that's what we saw from Louis Barry in our last game, where it just wasn't really happening for him in front of goal. Got in some really good positions, but the end product wasn't quite there. I think obviously we lost Tomlinson with cramp. That's obviously a big indicator of, you know, a lacking fitness. I'm hoping it just clicks for Friday, so I'm feeling fairly optimistic. We won't go into massive depth, just given the time and the fact that it is so very, very late. But what are you thinking predictions wise? And I don't want you to use your 4-0. I want a proper input on this one. What do you think we're going to be doing Friday?
I think we're going to see a change in shape. I think we're going to drop the 4-3-3. I think we're going to go back to the 3-5-2, see if we can get that one to work. Really stretch the game. I think we're going to see Egbo get his first start as the right wing back. We're going to tuck Hunty in. Davison will be up top with Elbaz. And I think we'll win 3-0 with a Davison goal and It's going to happen. I'm going to say Ellis and Egbo.
Announced tattoo. Yes, that's going to definitely happen. So you don't think? So the change to 5 at the back. I think a few people have been saying that this week. Do you think we're going to see Jake O'Brien slot back in? I mean, because obviously the 2 centre backs on Saturday came in for a little bit of criticism, unfair in some quarters, but not so in others, depending on which way you're looking at it. Obviously, you're going to be bringing it. If anything, you would think that going to 3 centre halves would be a positive move, and you would keep the two of them in there, both Conroy and Bowdry. But you've got Jake O'Brien champing at the bit as well now. Do you see him slotting back in at the weekend? And if so, who for?
He should. So should Akin. I mean, it's nothing against Dion and Frenchie, because to be fair to him, they've been all right recently. But Frenchie's openly come out really and said that he's going to retire end of the year. So why put game time into him when you've got Akin sat there, who we put near enough 2 years of development into, who at this rate's not playing. He's just going to say, all right, then I'll walk for free at the end of the season, go somewhere new. And then you've got O'Brien, who's a young chap we got on loan from Palace, and he can't get a sniff. So for me, I'd start Hunty on the left, Akin on the right, and the massive tree of a human being in the middle.
Now, my only consideration to you would be one of rhythm, consistency, stability. That would be my only note of caution. But like you, I am of a mindset where I'd like to see O'Brien, I'd like to see Akin get minutes. I'm thinking, in terms of prediction-wise, I don't think it's going to be a cakewalk. I think Harrogate are one of those sides. You never know what you're getting. I've got a sneaky feeling we'll just take a tidy 2-0, and I think it'll be Davison at the double. And I think both assists are going to come from Louis Barry. So watch this space. Anything else of note? Should we read into the fact? I was going to be a little bit devilish and ask you this question. Should we read into the fact that Jojo Woolacott didn't turn up at the official supporters club on the sofa event on Monday? Was that I missed the first 10 minutes? Was it explained away? Or is this more conversation about, not necessarily wanting to call any questions, a conversation about his future?
I don't even think it's anything to do with his future. I think it was more, and I know Vic's not the sort to have done it. It's more, he really did make a bit of a rash mistake at the weekend in a big game, and so it's more sort of like facing the cameras after that sort of thing. I feel like maybe Andrew or whoever's doing the media sort of had a word in his ear and sort of said, maybe it's best you don't do that.
Yeah, just keep him out the limelight. Yeah, I'm hoping so. And for all the reasons we've discussed on previous shows, I'm still foolhardy and maybe a bit naive, but I'm still optimistic that we're going to see Jojo in a Swindon Town shirt next season, albeit a lot will depend on what happens over the coming 6 games. Right then, Tyler, listen, a little bit of shameless promotion for your and my activities then, for the hardy listeners that are still with us this time of night. We've got a busy week coming up, mate, haven't we, next week? We've got, do you want to talk about what we're going to be doing in relation to the inaugural Sir Tom Broadbent Lounge Awards, Tyler?
Well, it's on the 20th, I believe.
Correct.
It'll be live from the kit room at the county ground. We'll have some of the players popping in to claim their awards. I think there's about 15 or so, maybe a bit more than that actually, but around that many awards being given out to the boys, and it's just our sort of style of awards night rather than a big do like the supporters club do. It's a bit more underground, sort of 606 as you'd word it.
A little bit edgy, Tyler, is what you're trying to say. We're a little bit edgy, aren't we?
Yeah, we're a little bit edgy.
But nonetheless, listen, I mean, I think you and I have both said in recent weeks, Tyler, we've been blown away by the progress our wee little show has made, and some of the numbers that we've been drawing from an audience point of view have attracted some plenty of attention from supporters, but also partners as well. We're delighted for the awards to be partnering with Dan Designs, who is a key partner for us going into those awards, and also Kevin and Amy Metcalf of Verilogic, a long-standing supporter of the club, are also on board as a principal partner of the awards, are playing a huge role in helping us get the awards together. And the club have been brilliantly supportive as well in terms of giving us that access. So we look forward to the awards that are going to be on the 20th. And we look forward to the night before the awards. We've got none other than Swindon Town legend Paul Caddis joining us. A la Mickey, Cads is going to be coming on board, and he is going to be fielding everything from your silly questions to also talking about incredible promotion season under Paolo Di Canio, and doing his inside story on that season as well. So we very much look forward to welcoming Paul Caddis next week as well. So you're getting double bubble next week, the awards and a Swindon Town legend as well. So we very much look forward to welcoming Paul to the show. So get your questions ready, because there's one criticism of the Swindon Town public is you're all a bit shy in terms of coming on this show. And that was always meant to be the spirit of our show. We think there's a real gap in the Swindon Town content market for high quality phone-ins. And we want to make sure that, that we're an outlet for that. And given we're after the watershed, people don't tend to be too worried about needing to duck questions. Tyler, aside from that, as you all know, we've got a whole host of people lined up after the awards and Paul Gaddis, and we'll be talking more about that in the coming couple of weeks. But it's going to be a busy few weeks for us leading up to the end of the season. But I think, Tyler, tonight, unless you've got anything to add, mate, we will draw a close to proceedings.
No, I've got nothing else to say other than up the town and up Athletica.
Old Town, yes. Old Town Athletic, ladies and gentlemen. Get on them on Twitter. Tyler, it's been a pleasure, mate. Thanks for keeping an eye on all the background tech and keeping things ticking along for us. And thanks to all the listeners for sticking with us right the way through to the end. Look forward to catching up with you next week.